Looks like our podcast has 500 downloads, Nick. This podcast is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Well, don't be too proud of this podcast we've constructed. The ability to speak to millions of people is nothing next to the power of YouTube.
Don't try to frighten me with your logical ways, Dr. Duck. Your sad devotion to that ancient platform has not helped you conjure up an audience or given you clairvoyance enough to predict the next big trend.
Welcome to It's About Nothing.
I'm okay.
I wasn't expecting you to do the choking sound with so much. You
No.
really committed to that.
I don't
didn't
do
you?
things by halves.
Oh dear. Well, I imagine that most people are familiar with this because everybody loves a good Star Wars movie, I would have thought, but I've certainly come across many who don't, including my wife, and which is very disappointing. My kids, I can't get it. They can't get into it either.
Your kids don't get into it. Oh my god.
No, they well, they've gone into it a little bit from time to time, but it's funny because kids, I've noticed today, they really like. As an example, the other day we were talking about, that show, the show Lost.
Yeah.
Because my kids said, "Oh, what's this show?" And I explained it to them, and I said, "I don't think you'll like it because them being 5, 7, and 10 and 9, and they were like, and Audrey, the 7-year-old, she goes, "Oh, is it one of those shows where people talk and they do lots of talking?" I said, "Yeah, it pretty much is, yeah," and that kind of sums up everything.
Although there's some adventure in there too, and some action scenes, and the premise is cool, obviously, but it does get complex and quite inward as it goes on.
Yeah, indeed. Well, they get. I don't think they like the narrative much at all. I think they like to watch. They show. I can't remember if it was Steven Spielberg or Lucas. Oh God, it could have been another director, but they talk about how in films you should never have a couple of characters sitting around talking about the plot. There's something should always be moving, and it should always be visual.
They say like show don't tell.
Yeah,
sort of this idea to keep the story moving.
Yeah. Well, there was. I'll have to remember. I might remember by the end of this podcast, but there was. That's right. I think it was. I was listening to a podcast. This is how nerdy I am. Not only started with Star Wars, but I was listening to a podcast about Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah.
And they were talking about one of the directors. They had many directors on that show, but one of the directors basically said had the camera always moving, and they said something like, "This is like a motion picture, or this is in film or television. It's in motion, and so everything should always be in motion. We shouldn't have people just standing around talking."
Oh, so they have to be moving, like walking and talking.
Yeah. So you see that in shows where
The West Wing. Aaron Sorkin's like a huge, known for this, obviously, and people have mocked it over the years, like walking very quickly and talking very quickly a lot of the time. So in The West Wing in particular, and that other show, the Newsroom, like banter, is a really big thing.
Yeah. There's a sense of energy, and in the Star Trek show, when they first made the transporters when they beamed down to the planets, I think it was in the Star Trek Next Generation show, but they designed it so that they had the transporter room right next to the bridge, which makes sense because it's always the bridge crew going on missions.
Yeah. And
then they realized that it actually removed the opportunity for them to have a discussion on the way to the transporter room. So they redesigned the sets and the ship to accommodate for the plot and for the story.
Yeah. Because you can't, like, if you're like teleporting somewhere, you can't really talk on the way, so to speak, can you? Like, you have to actually have that conversation while you're.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's right. They're not flying on a shuttlecraft usually. It's exactly. So it's so instantaneous that it actually takes away a bit of the lead up as well.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I selected this opening was because I was trying to think about a film that demonstrated a really bad workplace culture. And because the discussion today is about like what makes a good culture, essentially, what are the ingredients to a good culture, and when have we had experience looking at a bad one or observed it in the media. And so I was going through a list of possible movies or stories where there'd be a good quote, and it occurred to me that Christine has just arrived to drop off my cup of tea, which is lovely, thank you. Excellent. Yeah, so it's there we go. Very good. And anyway, the Christina's just outside.
I'm disappointed you didn't invite Christine to stay.
I should have.
Do that another time.
I will do it next time.
Yeah.
She's now fumbling with the door, and she doesn't know what to do there. The doors usually just pull them shut. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. What we're saying, yeah. So, the culture of the Empire from the Star Wars movies came to mind.
Yeah.
As being probably one of the worst cultures you can possibly imagine to be working in. If you're working for the Empire, unless of course you really gelled with it and you loved that environment. But they always seem all the underlings always seem to be quite terrified.
I'd say there was a strong incentive to succeed in the Empire. Like that was really driven. But if you didn't succeed, there was probably very low tolerance on poor performance. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, because Darth Vader used to strangle people.
Yeah,
and I think I remember there was I was reading something on Facebook where it was and it comes from the dialogue we were just talking to then, where there's this character in the film who basically questions Darth Vader, and and Darth Vader just has no tolerance for it, so he just starts choking him. And I remember reading something. It was like one of those memes where it's like, do you remember that scene in Star Wars where Vader loses his shit in a team meeting?
That's essentially what it is. Absolutely right.
So it's an interesting one, right? Because you could argue that there's certain cultures like that are high. I guess you get very low tolerance for error, but high compliance. High focus on excellence.
Yes. Outcomes driven.
Yeah, indeed. That's right. Outcomes driven, and then also complete. I guess. What would you call it when any outsiders? So any opposing force. You get zero tolerance for that. So you're either with them or against them. So it's a bit like if you have two competing businesses, or this one doesn't just compete with you, it destroys you literally.
Yeah. Well, this actually speaks to one of my examples, or one of you asked us to. So we'll maybe get to that in a moment. Yeah.
Well, of course the Star Wars, the Empire culture, if you think about what's obviously really bad about it, is it's probably not representing just a place of work, which it is for many people in those movies. I guess it's the inevitable conclusion to what happens with the totalitarian regimes. Right.
Yeah.
So that's what happens basically when you have not just one of many superpowers. In this case, the universe, but let's say it's the world, but one that basically dominates everyone. And so that sets up the story. And so you imagine that the movie is quite successful in some ways because it's off the back of the world wars, and it still resonates with people that this is actually possible. These things could happen.
Remember though, the Empire emerged as a response to the Republic, right? And with that, I probably defer to your Star Wars knowledge, but I remember the Senate was such a disorganized kind of parliament that couldn't really achieve anything, and there was this huge frustration. And then so Palpatine became initially the chancellor, I think, didn't he? But there was this feeling that they really needed to sort things out, and that it was sort of a response to this kind of this chaos and looseness, and then the Empire is born. And that's often how totalitarian regimes do sort of come about. Napoleon came about after the French Revolution because there was chaos, and Hitler came out of the Weimar Republic, which was sort of a loose, chaotic kind of situation. So the Empire, for all its faults, was a solution of sorts.
That's interesting, because when we had Marvin Oker on last year, he was talking about how the best time for a radical change is usually when the system is completely unstable and uncoupled, because when it's fairly stable, it just neutralizes a massive change. But when things are really unstable, someone can come in and tip things over and almost start all over again. I think I was also thinking about that. And it only occurred to me today, maybe it's occurred to everyone back when this film first came out in 1977, but there's the Death Star, which blows up planets. And I was thinking about this on the way in today, that's clearly an obvious reference to it, the atom bomb. This idea that you can actually develop with technology something so powerful that it's incomprehensible. And it's amazing, isn't it, that it even exists today, like that something like that actually can actually happen.
The ability to wipe out
It's almost like
worlds.
science fiction.
Yeah,
but it wasn't. It's not fantasy anymore, is it?
Science fiction is reality. Yeah.
Yes. Some examples of, I guess, if you look at the Empire and you sort of run a parallel to, I guess, what doesn't work in a workplace, because we're going to talk about what does work. We've both of us come up with 3 things we think are really important. It'd be interesting to see what you say. But what doesn't work, obviously, because in those movies, the Empire loses in the end. So, I guess the first thing you'd say is that if you don't build strong relationships, and if you're too tough, your competitors will essentially want to wipe you out. That's perhaps one. I don't think that's a message George Lucas was going for, but more or less, if you don't win a lot of goodwill over by ruling with an iron fist. And even your own supporters internally perhaps want you to fail as well. So there's an element of taking no prisoners and always trying to succeed, which doesn't work, as we know. In terms of the actual internal culture, zero tolerance for error, perhaps not the best approach, because it means that people are terrified all the time of making mistakes.
Yes, and that impedes their performance as well, obviously, yeah.
And there was also some examples there as well, like where in the end of that movie, they blow the Death Star up because there's a fatal flaw in it, which potentially could have been the reason why they didn't actually protect the Death Star, was because they didn't believe that this small ship could actually do any damage because it's so powerful. So they underestimated. So they were so powerful and so arrogant from that power that they didn't appreciate that there was actually a small threat that could actually uncouple them in the end.
Yes.
So their Achilles heel, so to speak. Yeah?
Yes.
So, and of course, even if we move away from what happens to them in the end, you just have to go through the list of reasons why you potentially wouldn't want to work there, which is just it'd be absolutely
getting
miserable.
Choked by Vader.
Yeah, and to get that culture.
Imagine the canteen. I don't know what that.
The canteen
would be like. I'm not sure.
Well, they probably don't even have the canteen. They probably just assume that you're going to have to just find a way to find your own food somehow. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly to get uniformity, you've got to literally get uniformity. Like you have everyone pretty much looks the same. All the stormtroopers are certainly the same.
Yeah, the uniforms of the stormtroopers, or I guess the officers, Imperial officers, was very reminiscent of I think East German military. So, and stormtroopers, that word is obviously associated with Nazi Germany. So,
well, yeah, both Lucas and Spielberg made films that were very much a critique of Nazi Germany, because Star Wars definitely. And Indiana Jones, of course, made the Nazis the villains quite often.
Yeah,
and so let's face it. I mean, the Nazis have basically been the villains in countless movies now, and it's the first example people come up with when they're unhappy with an argument. They go straight to at least it's not. At least we're not Nazis, or at least we're not Hitler. It's always.
I forget. There's a saying for this. It's like the first person who mentions Hitler in the argument loses.
Oh, okay.
I forget
Well, I just mentioned Hitler, but we're not having an argument.
No, not yet.
Have I lost the podcast? Now, the other reason I brought this up was I was thinking the other day that something that keeps coming up in the media seems to be something it used to be under the surface of workplaces, and that you never heard about was culture and these sort of what they call toxic culture, which is that word toxic. It just comes up all the time now. And the first one that came to mind that came out of the media, which absolutely destroyed a workplace as a result just recently, and you'd know about it because everyone knew about it. It was the Ellen DeGeneres scandal, I suppose you'd call it, where she had all these. Well, I think it started, and you might know a bit more about the story, but from my understanding is it started during COVID lockdown when they weren't shooting the show, and they started shooting it perhaps, I think, from her home or something. And so she brought in I believe she brought in contractors to do that work, and so there was probably a lot of disgruntled people who otherwise worked on her show, who probably felt they got nothing to lose. And the next thing you know, there were all these stories about how it was a horrible culture, people were treated very poorly,
and that went back a fair way, I think, like a number of years.
Yeah, indeed, and people made accusations about her as well, being very cold and distant, not wanting to make eye contact,
which is like the exact opposite of the persona that she has on the show. Like, she's a lot of fun on the show. Obviously everything's pretty light and frothy, you know, so it's, I think maybe that's people probably surprised, like that sort of, if you want to call it diva behavior or that sort of thing. She's probably not someone you would pick as being like that.
Do you think that, because I noticed a lot of people now sort of coming out saying things like, I could always tell that she would be like that in real life. And you kind of wonder, is that hindsight bias that you now go looking for it a bit and you go, oh, yeah, I could tell she would have been really difficult to work with? Or do you reckon that there was something there that people were picking up on?
I'm naive. Like, not like I watched her show in a big way, but I probably watched, clips off her show semi-regularly. And, you know, I'm old enough to remember her stand-up and even her sitcom back in the day. And I always just thought she was a lot of fun and took her at face value. So personally, I was surprised by the whole thing. And I know people who say, oh yeah, I saw that coming. I'm not surprised. But whether a lot of people, sort of any celebrity story like that, they're quite willing to believe that it almost seems to fulfill a preconceived idea they have.
About Hollywood, about the system. Yeah, so... just in, I think it was last week, or maybe the week before, the show's been cancelled. She's walked away from the show.
Well, she's retiring it. I think that's the official line. But the show clearly, I think the ratings are dwindling, which is obviously always what it gets down to. So she's probably wise to sort of wrap it up.
End on a bad note, really, in many ways. Yeah. So that's a good example of, like, now it's like, it's almost like probably through the social media forum now, people are being held accountable a lot more to the public, and they didn't have that platform before. There's a couple of other good examples. There was one which again sort of speaks to my nerdiness again. So, you know, we should probably reclassify the podcast for today in sort of the science fiction slash genre.
You could pick up a whole new listenership there.
Yeah. Can you imagine? That's it. You know, forget.
But then they're going to be really disappointed by all the subsequent.
Yeah, that's true.
And they'll write angry emails, no doubt.
No, they'll keep listening, but I don't mind, and they can write all the angry emails they like.
Absolutely.
But it was another interesting one came out. I don't know if you followed this with Joss Whedon. Have you followed this at all? So Joss Whedon is famous for making the series Buffy, and he also what else did he make?
Oh yeah, I'm vaguely familiar with this, not all the ins and outs.
He also made the first Avengers movie. He directed that.
And he did Angel too, I suppose. Because that followed on from Buffy.
Yeah, either that or he was a producer. But he's one of those people who directs, but clearly has a lot of power. With he'd be a producer and a writer and all sorts of things. And he was so he did those Avengers movies, the first two, and then about 3 years ago they were making the DC universe was making the Batman movies, and they were trying to start their own Marvel universe. And what they did was the first couple of movies didn't go as well as they liked, and then they made this Justice League movie. And so Zack Snyder was the director of that, and he was basically the brains behind all of it. He was a bit like the George Lucas. And then all of the studio got cold feet because the performance wasn't up there. So what they did is they hired Joss Whedon to come in off the back of those Avengers movies, and they thought, we'll just get this guy to basically recut it, reshoot scenes, and make it more like a Marvel movie. And then the film came out and it didn't do very well, and critically was panned as well. And then shortly after that, maybe let's say even a year or so after, one of the actors on the movie came out on Twitter and started tweeting about Joss Whedon and started making accusations of racism and sexism and all of these things. And then shortly after that, many others started to come out as well and started to say, it was a toxic environment. It was a terrible environment to work in. And then other demons came out in his past as well. And next thing you know, in a short space of time, this person his reputation's just gone completely down the drain.
Yeah.
And people then started talking about this other Justice League cut that must be sitting out there somewhere. And so just recently, Zack Snyder, the original director, got to recut it during the COVID lockdown.
Oh.
And it's only for fans really because it goes for 4 hours. But it's
yes.
You followed that?
I've heard about this.
Yeah. So it was like retribution. It was like all these people coming out saying Joss Whedon ruined this franchise.
Yeah.
He's not a very nice person. These other directors are really nice guy. Apparently, all the actors love him, and he had a terrible time because his daughter had committed suicide. And then they took the movie franchise away from him, and then he's come back and released this movie, which has it's been much more critically acclaimed than
It'll be a bit of a cult classic, no doubt.
Yeah, indeed. But yeah, it occurred to me though that it's amazing that how quickly Joss Whedon, who was like a nerd favorite, everyone was like, oh, it's he did Buffy and all these really popular science fiction films.
Yeah.
And all it took was some tweets and a little bit of critical mass, like what happened with Harvey Weinstein.
Yes.
And you lose, but maybe he doesn't lose everything, but he certainly has lost a lot of goodwill from fans. And I imagine there'd be a lot of producers who wouldn't want to work with him again, and actors.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how fragile these things can be. Like, it's obvious for some people there's almost open secrets about their conduct, but no one necessarily wants to be the first person to be quite brave, I guess, and go out there and, maybe tell their story or make an accusation. But then if they do, often many, many others come out. So it's, I mean, and there's a whole component to, I'm not talking about this one in particular, but there can be trial by media a lot of the time. So, in many cases, these situations don't even make it to court for various reasons, but the public will make up their mind, well ahead of time.
Yeah, it's a very difficult topic, isn't it? Because there certainly can be situations where you look at something and you go, I haven't actually heard the other person's side of the story. Now, I haven't actually heard Joss Whedon's for all I know. I mean, it paints, everything I've read paints a very bad picture.
Yeah.
But we haven't heard his side. And then the question would be, some people would say, what more do you need to hear from those people, though?
Absolutely.
But then you'd go, well, yeah, if you're in that situation, you'd sort of hope that at the very least you do hear what the alternatives are.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we might as well then just throw people under the bus and not have court cases and just go by what everyone's saying.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of there'd be plenty of instances where there are grey areas, or maybe he was a horrible person to work with, but maybe the most severe accusations weren't true. Who knows? We don't know. The other interesting one, and I'm really sorry because I just realised that this is this is actually probably the nerdiest of the three examples we've used today. Right? So we started off with Star Wars. I think I made a reference to Star Trek Voyager.
You did.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And then what did we just do then? Oh, we did DC Universe Marvel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been all.
So there's actually more than three. Yeah. It's more than three.
Keep going.
We're up to 4 now. Okay. This will be the last one. Maybe. This one was one I read, I think 2 nights ago. It was, I don't know if you're familiar with this site, but it was the first real movie discussion type site that came out on the internet back when the internet was big. It was ain'titcoolnews.com. Have you ever heard of that website?
I'm not that nerdy.
No, that's it's a whole history.
I'm fairly nerdy, but
look, even like the standard nerds today, like who watch the sci-fi ones will go, what are you talking about? That's just going off to another thing. But it basically there's a character on that who started the site, Harry Knowles, and he's an enormous guy. He's not a very...
You mean like comic book man sort of?
Yeah, really massive guy.
Okay.
He's not a very attractive guy. He's super nerdy, and he writes this stream of consciousness of reviews, and he's become a bit of a cult legend because he's so much of an outlier. But he had this site which is quite powerful because people were producing films, and if he posted a bad review about them, then
so they were paying attention to his reviews.
They were paying attention. The studios that were making the sort of films that people who go to that site would watch. Yeah. So let's say it's a new X-Men movie or something, and if he posted a really scathing review of it, they'd be worried about it because there'd be all these people hopping on and discussing how bad it was, and they jump on it. So the other day, I hadn't looked at this site for probably let's say 10 years or something. But out of curiosity, I was like, I wonder what's going on the side. And when I got there, it was like a bit of a graveyard, and all these people were talking about sexual harassment and assaults and all this stuff in the comments section. I was like, what's going on here? And anyway, he's one of the sort of the long list of, I guess, the Me Too characters who, again, I don't know exactly all the facts. All I know is from the rumors, what I've read on the site. But they're all going that he was basically groping women and going to these sort of cinema events and doing these horrible things. And he actually did put up an apology on his site, which I read, and it was very much that sort of the classic.
And has he withdrawn? Does he still post and review and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, he started to do it again. From what I can tell, I think he did withdraw for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And a few of the writers left as well because they didn't want to be associated with him, ones who had known him for like 15 years.
Yeah.
And there were other stories that emerged as well, people who actually worked with him who didn't get paid. They said the culture was toxic again. It was they had a situation where one of the writers, apparently he was working very hard. He just got a really curt Facebook message from Harry saying that we've decided we don't want you on our team anymore, and we've removed access to all of your accounts.
Yeah.
Best of luck. And just a really short, sharp message after working very hard for him. And it was one of the other reasons when I read that, I was like, oh, it'd be great to have a chat about, these toxic cultures, because some of these places sound just so terrible.
Yeah.
And I sort of think it's almost amazing that they ever come about, because they're so bad. If they're not just bad in one way, they're bad in
many, many ways.
Yeah, it's like once you've got a couple of bad things, if you go searching, you suddenly discover there's a whole host of other problems.
Yeah.
Financial issues, and
I think certain problems lead to other problems, though. So perhaps they're sort of perpetuated. So if you don't get some of the fundamentals right, then you're more likely to have bigger problems.
Yeah, I agree, and it's the other way as well, isn't it? If something is positive, and you've got something that's working really well, then it potentially leads to other things working well, attracts better people.
That's a big part of it too.
Yeah.
So if you've got a
that's one of your three, isn't it? I knew it.
Actually, it's not. It's not. Have we gone through what your three and my three actually?
No. We haven't introduced that. We had that offline. We just assumed that people. We assumed that everyone stopped listening by now.
Yeah. You're gonna do your three and I'll do my three, or who should?
I thought what we do is we go one at a time. Let's start with maybe the top one.
Yeah.
Did you rank them? Did I tell you to rank them?
You didn't really tell me to rank them, but we can do that.
Okay.
So
okay.
I'm just thinking now I'm thinking of like how
do you rank them? Oh, it does not look. It doesn't matter too much. It's not a definitive list.
My first one is it's respect, but I put it as like respect / trust. Like I think they sort of like. So I thought we were talking values here.
Yeah, right? That's good.
We're talking values.
That was my second one.
Okay, so I think that like obviously that can cover a lot, but it's everything from civility. People like treating each other, not just politely, but I've been thinking a lot about lately about I'm sort of managing a team at the moment, and like when I'm emailing them and sort of making it clear about priorities, like that if we need something that at 3:00 on a Friday afternoon that can wait till Monday, and the little things like that. But getting all that right kind of feeds into the bigger stuff too, about treating each other respectfully, without relationships and all of that sort of stuff, and trust obviously is important, because a lot of the time if you're in business with people, you're potentially trusting them with money or with deals or with information and all kind of things. So if you don't get those two right, you're probably not going to get other stuff right.
Yeah. I was just thinking that's probably like it's probably something that's like, I guess I don't know if you call it evolutionary, perhaps it is, but that, trust is kind of like fundamental to our nature, which is that we've got this really tricky situation where on the one hand, let's say our ancestors, there's one tribe that that they need meat, and the other tribe have got wool or something.
Sure.
Like that.
Yeah.
Let's say
the basis of
let's
rudimentary economy there.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Yeah.
You have wool. I have meat.
Indeed. yeah. And I wonder if it ever got that simple. But you could
Don't they just both have a sheep? Isn't that what it gets down
to? That's right. That's right. But one of them's got the process to get the wool off without contaminating the leaves or something.
Okay. But they're going to cooperate. Yeah.
They will cooperate. Yes, they will cooperate. Let's say for argument's sake, they've got something that you need that you can't manufacture.
Yeah.
And you could just go and take it.
Yeah.
But of course, if you do that, then you probably might lose the means for actually producing it, and there's lots of complications. But there does get to a certain point where you've got to almost establish a trusting relationship with this other group. But at the same time, be very wary, because if you come across strangers, they could also kill you.
Yes.
And so all our ancestors who were way too complacent, in fact, they're probably not our ancestors.
No.
No. That's right. Long and the short
of
it.
If they were really complacent,
Correct, yeah. The really complacent ones are long gone. The ones who are a little bit wary, basically, they kept their eyes open, and then if people portrayed them as well, and those stories would permeate perhaps, and then other tribes would hear about it and they wouldn't trust them, and the ones who weren't trusted got wiped out. So there's I think it's probably, when you say trust, it's obviously fundamental. Like if you don't have that, then nothing will work.
Yeah.
Society will break down completely. There's got to be a little bit of trust.
Yeah, I think so.
I was just thinking back to our days back at school.
Yes.
And the example one of the brothers gave in class was, always stuck with me, because it was, at the time I thought, it's probably a good example. He was basically saying there is trust everywhere. If there wasn't trust, you wouldn't, that the person filling up your car could quite easily put sugar in it, but they don't, right? And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But it's such an extreme example. Like, not only do you trust them to put the petrol in, but it's the idea that you also have to trust that they're not going to go to the effort to actually go and find sugar and actually sabotage you. Not just give you what you paid for, but also go to that effort. It's an odd kind of analogy.
I think ultimately now, is it Adam Smith? Like this idea that ultimately we're trusting their self-interest. So like if you're selling petrol, like it's ultimately not in your own interest to go putting sugar in people's tanks, because the word's going to get out there. Correct. That you're doing that, and your business is going to be impacted by that. So yes, we are placing trust, but ultimately, like, someone's providing a service, they want to have a good reputation.
They want to have a good reputation, and look, there's that, and there's probably deep down as well, not everyone, but most people feel more satisfied when they're helping another person and they're providing a service. So it actually feels good.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're always just sitting there going, I'd love to, stab this person. Yeah. If it wasn't for this reputation of mine, I would be stabbing them. It's like, actually, no, it actually feels good to do it as well. And perhaps that's something that's evolved as well. Like they're reinforcing this kind of, positive act towards another person.
But it's interesting, like, that some people would say there's no such thing as altruism, because ultimately you do a good deed because it makes you feel good about yourself. But, you could say that the feeling good is kind of like the dividend in a way. Like, it might not be the reason you help a little old lady cross the road, but it's kind of like a bonus that you get.
Yeah. They give an example in the psych textbooks. I don't think it's a meerkat, but it's an animal like that. That basically, one of them stays and scouts and looks out and puts themselves at risk.
We used to use a little year 8 boy at school like that when we smoked cigarettes. So we'd be smoking cigarettes down behind the oval, and he used to go up halfway up the driveway and keep a lookout for a teacher.
He was the meerkat lookout.
He was a little meerkat.
Okay, that's a good idea.
So, are you going to do that now?
Well, I was thinking
you're a bit past that.
I was thinking about maybe the meerkat's a good solution if they could look out for lots of things.
Yeah.
But the idea was that they've sacrificed their life, and the real question is, potentially they expose themselves, but does the meerkat actually feel good about what they're doing? And so you could argue that.
I feel good.
Do they actually feel? They go back and they feel like they feel proud, and
they probably do.
Do you reckon?
I don't know, because it's a sense of purpose. I think purpose is important.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, what they're trying to do is what I guess the evolutionary biologists would say is they're trying to pass on the genes, and that if their genes are part of that pool, then it's actually serving a purpose more so than their own individual lives. But yeah, certainly I think it's interesting you brought up trust, because it was when you had to really boil it down, especially when you had to pick three, you really had to be selective about those three, don't you? You can't just go, it's really important for there to be, like one of the ones I considered, which I didn't put in my list, was like a good sense of humor, because I think it's good for the tone, but I don't think it's one of the top three. I think that you can have a very well functioning culture that is humorless.
I'm sure you can, absolutely.
Or at least not that important.
Yeah, I've seen it, but it might not be as much fun. It works,
Yeah, and certainly I think that for people like you or I, we would probably value it.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of people who'd be like, I don't care. I go to work and to be productive.
Yeah.
And happy to have a laugh, but I'm not there to make friends or have a laugh. So there are plenty of people who have fun outside of work.
Yeah.
So, all right, so you picked trust number one. I picked it number two, so you might as well pick your next one, and we'll see where we land.
My second one was purpose, actually, which is sort of we've brushed on.
Better than my one.
Okay. Well, actually, going back to the Empire and Star Wars, like one thing you could say about the Empire was it did have a strong sense of purpose.
Yep.
Like they all knew what they were. What their objective was and why they were doing it, I suppose.
The Empire.
Yeah, the Empire.
Yeah, and the Rebel Alliance did as well.
Yeah, exactly. So they both did. But I like, for me at least, like, doing a job that is meaningful in some way is important. And then, like maybe, like you were saying before, for some people, like just, work's a paycheck, I suppose, and like 9 to 5. But I think people need to feel that there is purpose to what they do. And I saw an article a couple of years ago, there's probably been a few on this, about your job is probably rubbish. Like most people, a lot of people now, their jobs, like there's this argument out there that a lot of jobs are kind of meaningless, particularly in, what I do, consulting, for example, like just to completely talk myself out of business. But, but I know, I try and select what I do based on the idea that it's actually got some meaning, and that by doing it, you're contributing to different things. I think if people are ultimately doing a job that is completely meaningless, it wears them down.
Yeah, well, I guess that's an even bigger discussion, isn't it, about what makes a meaningful job? Like, is it? I think a lot of people would feel like if you've got a tangible output, people often say, well, at least I'm delivering something. Yeah. I think there are definitely lots of jobs which are so far removed from the ultimate product or the thing that's created that it becomes very difficult to draw a connection with the final product. So if you go in to, let's say, I don't know, help recruit some people for a job, that person, the people who go into that job then work, and then they may not see it something tangible, but ultimately something that they're doing has led to something else, and then it finally does. And you might go, the people who did the final thing, they're the ones who've actually made the difference. But you go, well, what about the recruiter, the person who enabled all these things to happen in the first place?
Yeah, the unsung hero.
Indeed. Obviously, okay, I think, I reckon your one is close to my one, because I actually picked a very boring, bland one, which I thought was an obvious one. I thought you'd pick this one. No offense, but I just thought it was an obvious one. Leadership.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I
right?
didn't. I deliberately left leadership because we've talked about leadership a lot, and when I said respect, like, covers a lot of stuff. Like, it doesn't obviously cover leadership, but I guess I sort of saw that tied up in there, that the leader treating their staff with respect.
Yeah, but I think that what you're talking about, the purpose one, comes in there because
good point. Yeah.
Like, and it doesn't always, like, there can be a context, like there could be like a let's say a crisis or something where it's very clear what the purpose is, and where a leader emerges and they don't actually set the vision, they just actually lead people literally. But I often think it's not just leadership in itself, but it's probably just some of those basic fundamentals, which is the leader setting a clear direction, clear vision, and then certainly I linking it to the setting the tone and of respect and listening to people and trusting them and setting the example and all of those things. Yeah. So that was my number one. I thought, as boring as it sounds, because everyone talks about leadership all the time, it's the most important one that I think. And then I had trust number two. What was your number three?
My number three was reputation, actually. So I wanted to think, like, so I guess respect, purpose are kind of internal, looking at what's happening inside the team, the organization, whatever. Reputation's this idea of how other people perceive us, whether they're our peers, our competitors, our clients, whoever they might be. So that this idea that maybe we have excellent culture, people want to kind of observe us and even copy us. That would be like the ultimate compliment in a way. Or we have a reputation for being good.
So a sense of pride you have as well.
The pride, trust, the people you can do business with. People people who work there are happy people. Right. So that sort of exudes out in different ways. And also that it feeds back in that the people who work there know that they've sort of got a good reputation and something they want to maintain. And as my father told me, you only get one reputation. If you have to sort of look after it.
So it's very good advice, though. And you know what? I know it maybe makes us sound old now, but some of that advice...
I think you're older than me, actually.
Am I?
By like 3 months.
Are you sure?
Yeah, definitely.
I was born in 1980.
Oh, I was too.
Damn it, I was born in 1979. Wanted to trick you.
Yeah, I thought you were.
Because it can still be 3 months. Well, I think what I was thinking was that if you get advice like that when you're 15 or 20, I don't think it sounds like just a motherhood statement.
Sure, yeah, it does, and it did to me then, and I
would have thought of that as well. I would have thought,
but you realise as time goes by,
absolutely, because you see people come and go, and you see things happen to people where you go, like leaders, political leaders, where you go,
and fair and unfair things.
Yes,
like your reputation to some extent is in your control, but it's not completely in your control.
Yes. So the third one I reckon, is actually similar again. Can you believe it? And I reckon we should do this all the time. We should just come up on the fly with 3 things, write them down, and see if they align.
It's actually better not to give us too much time to think about it, because normally you'd say a week ahead or 3 days.
And I would have looked and done some research.
And I would have taken long walks along the beach. And pondered it really deeply.
But that was my third one: long walks along the beach with your team every morning.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what you do. No, the third one I had was conscientiousness.
No, it's good. That's underrated, actually.
Yeah, well, there's 2 reasons for it. One is because I'm a psychologist, and I know that it actually is correlated. It's one of the best predictors of workplace performance.
Yeah.
But I was thinking it actually is related to reputation, because I think if you're very conscientious, you develop a good reputation.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the workplace, it only functions, the culture only works if everybody is basically hardworking and is trying to get to the end together, and they're committed, and they get stuff done when they say they're going to do it.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
Yeah,
and following through.
Definitely. And I think it leads, and certainly in organizations, I think it leaves people thinking, you've got a good reputation. People get a sense of pride from it as well. And if everyone's looking around and everyone's conscientious, then people don't feel as though they're doing all the work. And there's a whole heap of people who aren't doing enough work, because you see cultures where people are kind of miserable because they feel as though they don't get recognized.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's an interesting one. Like if you have a workplace where there's a perception or reality that like the load is not being carried in an equal way, or the appropriate way, and some people are working really hard and others are goofing off or doing whatever, that's very bad. For morale.
Oh, look, and I reckon as an individual, it's a red herring, because I reckon if you feel as though you're working harder, then that's actually a fantastic thing to know about yourself. If you think I'm doing it, and because you're actually will be recognized, maybe not straight away, but you'll probably be getting more work. People will be relying on you more, and your reputation is also a lot better. So if you are ever in that situation at a workplace and you think, all these people aren't doing enough work, I'm carrying the load. It's like, you should pat yourself on the back and enjoy that, because that's a great outcome.
That's probably true. It's like an investment in yourself in a way.
Yeah. And it's easy enough to say, because I know people would say, but everyone's getting paid the same, or maybe someone else got promoted, and that's where it gets very difficult, because you'd start to go, well, then you're working in an unfair workplace.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think you're right in that. But my sort of read on it is I've consulted in a lot of places where people are very unhappy because reward and recognition is not right.
Yeah, I said we have to do an episode one day on just like looking at the like Seinfeld in the workplace, because like there's a number of episodes where the different workplaces are featured, and like a common theme is like incompetence and idiocy being rewarded like
Yes.
through promotion. So there's
Yeah.
like often people in that show who are promoted are like clearly
Yeah.
unsuitable. Like the most obvious one I can think of is like the Peterman catalog, like the guy in the mailroom who ends up like on the executive
Yes.
team because like Elaine's basically scared of him or doesn't know what
That's
the hell
right.
to do with him. And
She's
then-
promoting him out of her sight, so she doesn't have to deal with him. And then everyone gets disgruntled because this guy.
yeah, and half the team, all the team leave, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, which is some justice in that, I suppose.
That's right. And there is also a great example, which is kind of loosely some inspiration for Opposite, my business.
Yeah.
Where George basically goes for a job interview for the Yankees, and he basically just rips into the boss, Mr. Steinbrenner, and tells him what a terrible organization it is. And he goes, "Hi, this man." That's right.
Great scene.
Great scene. It is. Now, I think that probably ends our discussion. It was a
slightly truncated discussion.
a truncated discussion, and it's a topic that's obviously. It's funny how the word topic is topical, I guess it is. So it's a topical topic. This is when you're getting towards the end of the day and you can't think of a better adjective.
Yes.
But I think we picked three really good ones. And as both of us, as I guess entrepreneurs, business owners, we have to stay true to this now.
We do, yeah.
We don't want to have a Whedon moment in like 2 or 3 years where they say those guys talked about culture. Gosh, that culture they worked in there, it was terrible.
We hold ourselves to our own standards.
We've got to hold ourselves above the Whedon standard.
Yes.
And the Harry Knowles standard.
Yes.
And
I think I can do that.
Yeah, and I think we can certainly hold ourselves above the Vader standard, which is the choking standard. Don't you think?
I'll try.
Yeah, you try. Okay, very good. Okay, excellent. All right, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Until next time.